Welcome back to Die Sexy, the podcast that talks about all there is to achieve ultimate health and vitality. Your host, longevity specialist Adrian Smith, will bring you an integrated approach to the human body.
Hi, everybody. It is Adrian Smith, and I am back with another podcast on how to not die any other way besides sexy. And I am here today with Rick Collins. Oh my goodness, where do we begin, Rick? Let's see. I've known Rick for a long time, met him through Coach Poliquin. And Rick is the law side of what we do in this underground realm of ours of trying to stay healthy and fight the other industries that we have. But he also has quite an extensive background in just being a part of the strength community and bodybuilding and competing and, oh my gosh, so much fun stuff. So, Rick, why don't you get into kind of your title and then how and why you started this whole thing?
So great. Well, first, thank you for having me on the podcast. Great seeing you. You look amazing as always. My background comes from sort of the two different sides. On the one hand, I was a gym nut, training nut, guy who was totally into fitness and nutrition and ultimately bodybuilding, competed as a bodybuilder, ran a personal training business for a while. So I've been in that space, the gym space, the health space for even before I even went to law school. And then sort of in my other in my vocation as opposed to my avocation, I was an assistant district attorney. So I come from the background of criminal law and criminal justice and worked as a criminal defense lawyer since I started the firm that I'm still part of all of these years later. And I've done a lot of criminal defense work. When steroids became a controlled substance, because of my background in health and fitness, it was sort of a natural fit for people who were getting jammed up in cases, legal matters involving performance enhancing drugs or cosmetic enhancing drugs to call me. And so I started doing a lot of work in that area. To this day, I probably do more work in the area of where health and fitness, particularly hardcore health and fitness, intersect with laws and regulations. I do a lot of work for dietary supplement companies, particularly sports nutrition companies. So I'd say that half of my work is keeping people out of trouble, particularly in the sports nutrition space, making sure that they're compliant with all FDA regulations and rules. And then the other half of what I do is getting people out of trouble when they're already in trouble. And that can be anything from people possessing, selling, distributing, importing, manufacturing any kind of steroids or SARMS, and we'll talk more about that, peptides, anything that is regulated in some way that the government thinks you shouldn't be doing certain things, as well as athletes or others who may test positive for a performance drug or any banned substance and need help in that regard. So I represent a lot of people in the health, strength and health space. I've represented competitive athletes. I've represented physicians and all walks of life. My base is in New York, but I calculated the other day, I think I've practiced law in over 40 different federal courthouses across the country. And so, which I don't know if it's a record, but it may be close, but I travel a lot. I love what I do. I have a particular unique set of skills to help people in this world. And so I'm just grateful and blessed that I can do what I do.
Absolutely. So let me ask you, when we talk about a Schedule 3, so we're going to talk as if people don't know anything. What exactly is a Schedule 3 steroid or drug?
Sure. So the federal government regulates drugs of abuse, and we could include cocaine and heroin and marijuana, ketamine, you name it, that are drugs that tend to addict people to increase their, their dependency and are subject to abuse. So a law was created called the Controlled Substances Act. It's a federal law, but every state kind of has its own version of it. So it exists both on the federal and the state levels. And so what that does at the federal level is it gives the Drug Enforcement Administration, the DEA, the authority to go after people who are not abiding by the laws. They may be selling it without being a pharmacist, or they may be giving it away, distributing it, and not being a doctor to be able to write a prescription. So the Controlled Substances Act is what enables the government to go after drug crimes, basically. And there's 5 schedules. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 5 is the most serious drugs, the highest potential for abuse and dependency. That would include things like heroin. Interestingly, up until now, marijuana, although that's changing. Steroids are kind of in the middle at a Schedule 3 level. That law went into effect in 1990. And since that date at the federal level, if you are caught selling or possessing a Schedule 3 drug outside the scope of a legitimate medical prescription, then you can be subject to arrest and prosecution.
And testosterone is a part of that.
So the definition of anabolic steroids includes all sorts of synthetic steroids that the strength and health community are very familiar with, things like dianabol, trenbolone, nandrolone. But it also includes testosterone, which is really the primary, the granddaddy of all the anabolic steroids, and coincidentally, something that is a endogenous hormone. It's present in the bodies of every man, woman, and child in America and the world. So it's interesting that we've actually created made a controlled substance out of something that's naturally within our own bodies.
Yeah, which I find very strange, but that means that only doctors can prescribe testosterone.
So yes, you would need a DEA license in order to prescribe any controlled substance, and that would include testosterone or any kind of anabolic steroid. And anabolic steroids do have medical uses, as does testosterone. Things like Anavar or oxandrolone are used in burn situations. So there are medical uses of anabolic steroids, but you would need to be a doctor to prescribe it, and it would have to come from a pharmacy. Unfortunately, because the way the laws are constructed, that you can't prescribe a anabolic steroid, including testosterone, for a non-medical purpose. In other words, hey, I want to get bigger. I want to be more jacked. I want to have a 6-pack for summer. You go to your doctor and you say that, the doctor is going to say, well, that would be a felony for me to prescribe that to you. So that then has caused essentially a black market with respect to anabolic steroids. So the majority of steroids that are within the strength community, whether it's bodybuilding or powerlifting or any other strength sport, the cosmetic use of anabolic steroids is really relegated to the black market. So you've got people who are selling steroids on social media sites.
Okay, so and if we want to let's stay a little cleaner, I guess you can say, with talking about testosterone itself. Now, testosterone can be used at higher levels, like you said, male or female, to produce this amount of strength or more so muscle mass, anything like that, cosmetic, right?
Yeah.
But we also know, as you said, it's produced in our body. We need it as we get older, we lose it. We need it to prevent other diseases. I mean, we can just pick on something as simple as heart disease in male or female, right?
Mm-hmm.
So when we talk about it being that way, how does that borderline as far as it goes into being an anabolic street value versus being an anabolic, medically speaking, when it is preventing disease?
Right. So that's a great question, Adrian, because it really comes down to kind of an overlapping Venn diagram to some degree. So in the law is less muddy in that respect. It kind of differentiates it as if there's a bright line. There's either medical or non-medical. So if a prescription for testosterone is medical, in other words, to treat a disease, you've got low testosterone, what's called hypogonadism, low testosterone, clinically low testosterone. Well, then a prescription for testosterone is in the medical context. If you are perfectly healthy, you have normal testosterone levels, and you have no symptoms of low testosterone, but you just want to get a 17 or an 18-inch arm at the end of for the summer, at the end of the spring for the summer, well, that would be a non-medical prescription. That would not be legal under the laws. The reality is, though, that there's some overlap, right? Because if you are symptomatic, how symptomatic would you need to be for a doctor to prescribe it? And is it relevant that there are some cosmetic benefits that would attach even to a medical prescription? So there is this kind of strange gray world where people could disagree. I can tell you that the conservative endocrinological, societies will say that testosterone should be a last resort. They're generally very much against prescribing testosterone, even in situations of low testosterone, even in situations of symptoms. They'll say that if somebody is, for example, in the lowest quartile, in the lowest levels of normal, that they shouldn't be prescribed testosterone, even if they feel like crap, even if their libido is flagging, even if they feel tired all the time, even if they have all these other symptoms that would be consistent with hypogonadism. So that's sort of one extreme. At the other extreme are the folks who say, well, everybody should be on testosterone, regardless of symptoms and regardless of levels. And even if you're, at the highest levels of normal, it can't hurt to give more. And that's a very, very different ideology than conservative endocrinology. And there is this tension between the practitioners of what we might call anti-aging medicine, who are much more progressive and think, hey, testosterone can really improve people in terms of how they feel and how they interact, and it can improve their health. And this more conservative, old school endocrinological kind of thinking that it's really overused or abused.
Well, and then, I mean, for me, being in the studies that I do and the way that I look at things is, we have this world of very high costs into obesity diseases, high costs into aging diseases. And I look at something as simple as a testosterone and say, if a male or a female, but particularly, let's just talk about males, need it. And you mentioned a minute ago about the levels, the ranges, which they just changed again, right? I think it's even 300 points less now again, something like that.
Yeah. I mean, we could have a whole talk about how levels are manipulated for particular purposes. We've seen that, for example, with cholesterol, right? And so gradually the levels are lowered so that people qualify for certain drugs that wouldn't have qualified before. And there is, whether it's conspiracy theory or not is open to anybody's assessment. But there are those who believe that big pharma controls some of those levels with respect to engineering it to get more people on a daily statin or a daily drug. When it comes to testosterone, I think the levels have been gradually being lowered, but in part, those levels are correlated with not what's optimal, but what's average, right? So if we're looking at average levels and we find out 10 years from now that the average levels are much lower, well, then that becomes the new range, right? That the average levels become the range. And the reality is that doesn't necessarily mean that that's healthy. It doesn't mean that's where they should be. There's evidence, for example, that thousands and thousands of years ago, the average testosterone levels were much higher, particularly before civilization, when our early ancestors were out there hunting and gathering, and before agriculture existed. They've looked at the skulls of ancient hominids, and they find that it's indicative, and jaws, much higher testosterone levels than now. And testosterone is a hormone that I think, is generally regarded by scientists as something that it increases as needed, right? It's the hormone, get up and go hormone, right? It's what allows you to fight that saber-toothed tiger, or to chase down that prey that you're going to be hunting when you're living.
Or that woman that you need to mate with.
Absolutely. Yes, it increases for all of those. Interestingly, testosterone levels typically go down after a man fathers a child, because the body knows that it's time to take care of that kid for a little while, right? So our hormones are pretty wise in those regards. But yeah, so that the range definitely is not what it was before.
Yeah. So if we get into the health of it, we get into the aging. If we say, okay, the cost of obesity is causing us to spend more money, and diseases of aging are causing us to spend more money. And you had mentioned cholesterol levels being changed so that they can sell the drugs. When is it, have you ever heard or support, I'm drawing a complete blank now, been on somebody's side to fight for testosterone? And why do you think it is that they are lowering and holding back the usage of testosterone when it can prevent diseases of aging, when it can prevent obesity, when it can help us be healthier overall?
Yeah. So that's $1 million question. I'm not sure anybody has a definitive answer to that. I think it depends on perspective. There would be those who would say that prescribing testosterone throws off the hormonal balance of the body's very delicate hormonal system. And so when you increase testosterone, you also have some aromatization into estrogen, and it gets complicated. The body has biofeedback systems. When you take in exogenous testosterone, ultimately your own testosterone production diminishes. So there's no drug that doesn't have side effects, let's face it. And that includes testosterone. Every drug has side effects. Very often the poison is in the dose, right? The higher the dose, the more problems you'll have. And that is a problem with testosterone and anabolic steroids in the realm of cosmetics, because some of the people who are using it, hey, I'm not going to take a 200 milligram a week dose like a replacement dose. I want to get jacked and I want to compete in some big powerlifting show. So I'm going to take 2,000 milligrams a week. And, after about 1,000 milligrams a week is when we see some of the more troublesome side effects. So there's that. There are also those who would believe, and there's a whole body of people who believe that that big pharma doesn't really make money off healthy people, and that the sicker you are, the more likely you'll need a whole host of drugs, many of which are patented drugs, and many of which are very lucrative for everybody involved with that. And so there are those, who will say that there's some benefit to big pharma and maybe even to the government in keeping the masses weak and sick. It depends how far you want to go down that rabbit hole, certainly. But there's no definitive answer on why there is such a bias against testosterone, both from the medical perspective, as well as I think even from the metaphorical perspective. When we hear the word testosterone today, there's very few people who would attach in the general public a positive connotation to that. Testosterone, I think it was Alan Alda who, many years ago in 1975, first coined the term testosterone poisoning, that men are suffering from all the bad things that men do are because of testosterone. And even more recently, James Cameron, the film director, blamed all of his bad behavior when he was earlier in his career on testosterone. So we've got this demonization of testosterone for all of those sort of social reasons. And then we've also got what was the catalyst for that law that criminalized testosterone and anabolic steroids in 1990, and that is sports doping. So in 1988, Ben Johnson, Canadian sprinter, ran the 100 meters at the Seoul Olympics, won the gold medal, and then tested positive for Winstrol. And heads exploded in the sporting world because now you had this situation where a Canadian beat an American, Carl Lewis, while he was cheating on this banned substance. We need to get steroids out of sports. And that was really the reason that steroids were thrown into the Controlled Substances Act with all of those other things like heroin and cocaine. Nobody's ever knocked over a liquor store to get anabolic steroids, right? Nobody is lying. The social blight that occurs from heroin addiction or fentanyl addiction is not associated with steroid use. If anything, steroid users tend to be more ambitious, maybe overly ambitious in many ways. And so it's kind of the square peg in the round hole of that law. But it was sports doping that really it was the reason for that. And I think that when you say steroids or even testosterone, to many people, particularly outside of our world, there's a connection to cheating. Steroids are cheating. It's that there's an ethical issue to it, even though it's mostly used in cosmetics. Studies have shown that close to 80% of the people who are using steroids non-medically, in other words, not prescribed by a doctor or for a medical purpose, who are using it non-medically, are not using it to compete in sports. They are simply gym rats that you and I have known in the weightlifting community for decades, who just want to look better, who just want a bigger chest, bigger arms, better abs, and maybe increase their bench a little bit and look better when they're in a tight t-shirt, and so we have this law that criminalizes those people for doing that, which is kind of a weird thing when we don't criminalize other choices that people make, which, are also cosmetic and which also have side effects. So if I chose to get bicep implants, I could go to a plastic surgeon, and at the risk of general anesthesia and infection and, bad results, etc., he would be able to do that legally. And yet if I went to a surgeon or a doctor and asked for the same effect, bigger biceps, through a course of a cycle of anabolic steroids, he would say, that's a felony. I need to throw you out of my office. So there is some weirdness to it when we look at sort of that personal autonomy issue. And that is, should we have a right to make our own bad decisions? And let's just assume that doing a cycle, even a moderate cycle of anabolic steroids, is a bad decision. Let's just make that assumption. Not sure it's true, but let's assume it. Certainly outside the scope of supervision by a doctor and buying black market substances. Yeah, let's agree that's not a bad that's a bad idea, not a good thing to do. We allow people to eat their entire diet in fast food restaurants. We allow people to smoke cigarettes. We allow people to drink to excess every night if they choose to. And nobody's arresting those people. And I think it's because we've decided as a society that people should have the right to make choices, even if they're bad choices, as long as they're about them. But that stops before you get to anabolic steroids. And that I've always thought that there should be some further consideration of that.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's so many, how should I say, double dualities, and there's so many wrongs and rights. Like I just did my last podcast was on biofilms that show up around those implants. And, I just had a lunch with someone who's about 78 now. He's one of my clients. He's jacked, looks amazing. And he was saying he was at a, wow, my brain today. I'm so sorry. It's only
Coffee,
English.
caffeine,
Right.
caffeine.
I need some.
Yeah,
he was
here.
at a reunion, and he said that they were overweight. All they talked about was their
Mhm.
health elements, but
Yeah.
they got a facelift. And I'm like, what? So
Right.
it's like they won't go ask for testosterone. Their doctors are not testing them for. I
Right.
have clients in their 70s that aren't tested for testosterone ever
Right.
in their life.
Yeah.
But they can go get a facelift, and they can, I watch women that waddle into hair salons with their Louis Vuitton bags and their Mercedes Benz and their big rock. And it's like, do you honestly think we care about your hair and the car
Right.
you got out of when your health is shit? And testosterone for women, I think even in most times work better than looking at estrogens as hormone replacement when they hit menopause, premenopause, perimenopause. So it's annoying. It's really annoying, especially on the side of trying to prevent, as I said, diseases of aging. I mean, it's
Sure.
really simple. Something as simple as keeping your testosterone level. I know for what I like to do, even like with my daughters, I did it. They're 20. I want to know what your hormones are now, because that's where you want to kind of look at being.
Get a baseline. Yeah.
You got it. And that's where you want it to be. And that's where you should maintain it. And we can sit here and nitpick all day about the foods and all that stuff, but those of us that, whether or not we want to be conspiratorial or not, but those of us that look to keep that hourglass kind of going a little slower,
Sure.
right? And even as I say, if I die tomorrow, I want to look good in my casket. Let's just put it that way. Okay. So like I said, we can argue that all day, but have you ever represented somebody that said, look, I'm sick, I don't feel good, and my doctor can't give it to me? Have you ever been on that side of it? Or is it always just defending those that give it when the doctors say not? Because I also heard that there's a new fine line that even doctors have to walk, as far as being able to match notes with their clients, their patients, when they start to give a little bit higher dosing of a testosterone for HRT, even in an aging patient or a patient that's showing symptoms. So it's a very fine line. So have you ever been on the other side?
I mean, I would argue that every case I deal with is a result of the sort of prohibition style prevention of doctors to be involved in the equation of prescribing testosterone or anabolic steroids. So, when the law went into effect in 1990, the effect was to kind of drive doctors out of the equation. Doctors don't necessarily want to get involved with the DEA. They don't want to have, triplicate reporting. They don't want somebody in big government who's got a gun and a badge looking over their shoulder. And so in the aftermath of that law taking effect, it was effectively prohibition for the majority of people who would want these drugs other than medically. And so the big pharmaceutical companies kind of bowed out. There was no money to be made off it. Pharmacies weren't going to carry it. Doctors weren't going to prescribe it. So what happens? Well, we should have learned the lesson of what happens in the 1920s, right? So when alcohol went into alcohol prohibition, what happened? Suddenly the legitimate source of supply was cut off. Where there's demand, there's going to be supply. So what happened? Guys like Al Capone moved in, right? And so now he was going to provide what the legitimate sources could no longer provide. People were making bathtub gin, getting sick, dying from all of the issues. The effects of the prohibition of alcohol were devastating and horrible. And what, you kind of should know those things, that is what happens when you have a prohibition style law that goes into effect. So I would argue that all of the dealers, that the steroid traffickers, the underground labs, the kitchen chemists that I've represented, exist primarily because the legitimate source of supply was prohibited in 1990. And yes, I have represented all those folks, but I've also represented people who were possessors. People do get arrested just for possession alone without any trafficking involved. It's not as common, but it does happen. I've had cases where a guy, is stepping out on his fiance or his girlfriend, and he's got his steroid stash in their bedroom, and she's angry, and she calls the police, and she, says, "I've got a ton of steroids. My boyfriend's a steroid guy," and the police are going to come and they seize the steroids, and he gets charged with it. So many of the guys that I talk to, both who are dealers and who are simple possession guys, the few that I have these days, will say that the reason I went to the black market is that, I have a doctor who doesn't understand and just didn't prescribe them. He doesn't even know what testosterone or steroids are, other than what he's read or heard on the mainstream media, and it's all negative. So yeah, you've got a level of knowledge on the part of the medical community that is pretty sad, generally, the mainstream medical community, and sort of bro science, as you'd say, is really what the body of knowledge is in terms of how to use them, when to use them, what to use, all of that. It's all exists through bro science, because there's really no hard research that's been done in this area, because it would be deemed unethical to prescribe the kind of doses, more than replacement doses, that would replicate the way that cosmetic steroid users are doing cycles of use and using some drugs that may ameliorate some of the side effects, or block some of the estrogen, or block some of the high acne producing aspects, or things like that.
Yeah, and I think that comes to purity as well, because we need estrogen in order to convert testosterone. So we need, well, I shouldn't say estrogen, estradiol. So that's when we worry about the quality of things, the same as anything else. If I can't afford, oh, poor people, if I can't afford to get a butt implant, I'm gonna go get something injected in somebody's house somewhere, right?
Right. Sure.
So when we start to look at the quality of things, over the years that you've been doing this, what have you seen as far as the quality of stuff going down? And is it starting to kind of come back around? Because I know well, I can't say more doctors, but I think there's becoming more of an awareness to testosterone importance again. So what has been your wave with that whole thing as far as the quality?
So I would say, in the medical context, the quality is, there still are pharmaceutical grade testosterone and other anabolic steroid drugs that doctors can prescribe. There's also compounding pharmacies that will make testosterone or other anabolic steroids under quality control, good manufacturing practices, standards. So that's one thing. The other thing is really where most of the steroids come from that are being used by people who don't have prescriptions, and that is the underground labs, the kitchen chemists who are making it. And some of them are very good and some of them are not so good. 20 or 30 years ago, a lot of the underground market was finished products that were coming from overseas, either Mexican veterinary steroids or European steroids that would be imported or smuggled into the US. Now there's a much higher vigilance at the international borders, including the airports. So it was decided at some point that so much of this stuff is getting seized by customs that we need a new model. The demand is still there. There's got to be supply. And so what the current model is that most of the steroids that are in the underground products in the US were imported as powder from China, as a raw powder in a kilo of powder, mislabeled as something else, maybe creatine or something, makes it through the airport, winds up ultimately in the kitchen of somebody in Des Moines or Pittsburgh or Tampa, who then makes that powder into the injectable liquids or the tablets, if they have a pill press, to then sell, typically over social media. And I've represented clients, when you talk about quality, I've represented clients who were fastidious, meticulous in their quality control, as much as you can in a non-clean room, of somebody's house. On the other hand, I've represented clients who were not very clean or detail-oriented, and I've seen video of the execution of search warrants where the DEA is filming the lab, so to speak, where these are made, as the cat is walking over the various vials, and it looks like somebody Beirut in in the 1980s or something. And so yeah, and it is kind of scary to think that somebody's going to be injecting that into their muscles, and that's just another example of why these laws that are intended to interdict abuse or dependency, like the Controlled Substances Act for steroids, there's some backfire aspects to it, and it's certainly less safe now because of some of these issues of quality control than it was before the law went into effect. And to the extent that doctors have been kind of less interested in being involved in it, the average internist, and I'm not talking about the TRT people or people in anti-aging specifically, but you go to your average internist, they don't know much. The average steroid user may know more than the average internist about the details of these issues.
Yeah, for sure. I do notice that the medical industry, even if they're well versed, if you want to say that, are not as versed as bro science. That's for sure.
Right.
And I think it's like you said, where there's a will, there's a way.
Sure.
And we can everything, even to dosing of magnesiums and creatines are way different than anything you're going to see there. Even in for me being functional medicine practicing and seeing the difference in the way that I use a gut rehabilitation protocol versus what they use in the hospital, functional medicine section is way different.
Yeah. I mean, I wrote an article a couple of years ago, and I write a lot. I wrote for Muscular Development magazine for close to 25 years, a monthly column. At some point, I'm going to upload all of those columns into some archive. But I wrote a piece called "Was Bro Science Right All Along?" And I looked at four things. One is, bro science had always said that more protein in the diet would be beneficial. And the mainstream advice was, your kidneys are going to fail if you take more than the recommended daily allowance, right? I mean, that was, and as time has gone on, who's been proven right? The bro science was proven right. The studies are quite clear about the value of protein. The other was fat in the diet. The mainstream advice was stay away from all fat. That's terrible. We had a craze in the 80s of low fat. Every product was low fat. What were they filled with? Sugar, right? And so, and there are those who say that it was the sugar industry who was behind that whole low fat craze. But what we now find is many of the studies are showing that the bodybuilders were right. There is a place for fat, including saturated fat in the diet. And that, all of those empty carbs, those bags of Fritos and all of the, cookies and baked goods, that all that sugar is really the problem. And then, bodybuilders have always said that bro science said that resistance training was of great value. I remember when I was like 19, I was competing in bodybuilding, and I went to my internist for my annual physical, and he took a look at me and he was like, "What are you doing? My God, stop. You need to stop this." I'm like, "What am I doing?" You're lifting weights. You're going to ruin your joints. You're going to do he had all this list of terrible things that were going to happen if I continued to lift weights. And I said, "Well, what am I supposed to do?" Cardio. All you need is cardio. Just do cardio. And he weighed probably 140 pounds. And, and I said to myself, I know this is wrong. This is bad advice. And of course, all of the science, particularly in the last 10 years, has shown that maybe resistance training is as important or maybe more important than cardio. And particularly for women as you age, they've done studies where geriatric women are put on resistance training and their bones actually gain calcium and density. I mean, this is fantastic. And then last was, bro science always said that some hormones are okay, right? And I think that we're now beginning to recognize more and more that testosterone replacement and hormone replacement has a role, that it's not the boogeyman. It's not, it can be abused like everything else. But I think bro science was far more right than it ever was wrong.
I agree. And, we can argue that whole thing. For me, I mean, you've seen me in person. I'm a tiny girl and I lift heavy, and I will never.
But you're pretty damn jacked. Yes.
and I will not lift heavy, not lift heavy. And for me, like when my chiropractor's been my same chiropractor since I started. Actually, he was the one that helped me find my scoliosis, which is how I got into corrective exercise. My engineering brain just set off down that path, and creating the exercises to put my spine back in place, and how far down that went, the science behind that. And as I've aged, and as we just did an x-ray, I said, let's do this for shits and giggles. It's been like 10 years. Oh my God, the amount of bone density in my hips and the spacing. So since I've started lifting, I went from 5'1" or 5'2", excuse me, to 5'2 3/4. So I've actually grown 3/4 of an inch.
Nicely done. Yeah.
Yes. And the whole hips, my bones and my quads, and my, my femurs, everything was just white, just pure white. And so I looked at him and I said, because he always used to tell me, you can't bench so heavy, your little bones. I'm like, oh, please. And so I looked at him and I said, so what you're saying is I can still lift heavy shit.
Right. Exactly. And you now, still are. Yes.
Yeah. And, I have not taken anabolics. I have never had an anabolic in me, but as I'm getting closer to, I'm 49 now. So getting closer to hitting the age of losing and depleting. Now, I will say this, bro science, eat right. You talked a minute ago about the fats and stuff, and there's a lot of bodybuilders that are still on this low fat, broccoli, rice, and chicken freaking diet. Right. Kill me slowly. Okay. At least eat the damn legs and thighs of the chicken, but whatever. So, for me, it's like I've been, quote unquote keto for 8 years now, almost 9 years now. I don't do grains, things like that. My levels are pretty damn good.
Right.
Growth hormone, sure. I mean, I'm getting to that point of things going in a different direction, but I'm going to tell you now, I won't say that anabolics are in my future yet, but for the quality of muscle mass, the amount of muscle mass, the bone density, my hair growth, right? My skin texture. I don't, like I said, it's to me, anti-aging, anti-prevention of aging symptoms. Yeah. So when we go through that and I look at this and I say, okay, this has been my diet. This is what I've done. This is what I've done with so many clients over 26 years. Being able to not give them cardio, focusing on nothing but heavy strength training, knowing the difference between breaking it off. I also bro science, powerlifter or bodybuilder, which one are you? Can't be both. Help be both, right? Every 3 weeks, switch it, have fun with it, do your accessories. Me lifting as heavy as I have for as long as I have, I don't have any joint issues, knock on wood. I don't have any issues with degeneration of tissue. But I also equate that to not just a good diet, but also making sure I take care of my micronutrients as well as my food intake. Okay. So when you go down this, and we're going to talk about something maybe you didn't see coming, but HRT. So not HRT, HGH, where does human growth hormone come into play with this? Because you don't hear a lot about that, but me training this way, my clients training that way, you training the way you have, you can't omit the fact that there's a possibility that your testosterone levels, your growth hormone has stayed a little above what it should be because you don't sit in a chair all day and play video games and eat shit all day. Right. So as even as superhumans, we're going to say we're superhuman, right? As we go through this and we start to look at replacing things that are getting depleted, that nature,
Sure.
Mother Nature is saying, okay, you're not going to have it anymore. Let's talk about human growth hormone.
Mm-hmm.
How does that play into this?
So first, from a legal perspective, human growth hormone is the only drug in the United States that by statute, by a federal law, cannot be prescribed for other than an authorized use. Every other drug can be prescribed off-label, and most drugs are prescribed off-label. The authorization for the drug is to treat high cholesterol, but they find out, hey, this is great for blood pressure. The doctor can prescribe it. Most drugs are prescribed off-label because to get the authorization is incredibly expensive. And then to try to get another authorization for another use, it wouldn't make sense. A law was put into place at the same time that the steroid law was put into place that basically says that human growth hormone can only be prescribed for an authorized use. And the authorized uses are very, very limited. There's very, very few of them. One is adult onset growth hormone deficiency. And so that's kind of the way that it gets prescribed for some folks, although how to diagnose that becomes a question of whether you need an arginine stimulation test or not. Is testing IGF-1 levels sufficient? There's a lot of dispute about what is sufficient for it. But human growth hormone is like testosterone, another one of those substances that seems to diminish. We see studies show it diminishes over time. And I think this brings up kind of an ideological difference in how you perceive life. And that is that the fact is, after we have kids, after we're of childbearing age and raising the kids, nature really doesn't want too much to do with us. We're kind of, the whole purpose of our existence is to pass forward our genes. That's really the point of the existence of all carbon-based life forms, right? To pass that genetic material forward to your kids, and then they give to their kids. So that's kind of the purpose of it. And once you're too old to do that, nature kind of wants you out of the way. So your teeth fall out, your hair falls out, you get wrinkles, you're not as attractive. There's no reason to be attractive anymore, right? And so, you have less energy, all of you lose your muscle mass. So it's a gradual, easier step into the grave from all of this slow deterioration. And there are those who believe that staying natural as you age is what nature intended. And it probably is. Nature did intend for all of those things to happen to you, for you to ultimately look horrible, feel horrible, and climb into the coffin. That's nature's plan for you, because nature only cares about your genetic material moving forward. On an individual level, though, I have a bit of a problem with that, right? So, from an individual perspective, I don't have such a strong feeling that doing what nature intends is necessarily good for the individual. I think it may be good for the society, maybe for the species, perhaps, but for those who are now past breeding age or who are, not interested in that, and are aged to a point where, where nature would have us kind of begin that deterioration. The old saying, don't go into that night, right? Go, fight as you go, fight against the light as you go. So yeah, I think that there is a philosophy, and that I think that's more the anti-aging practitioner's philosophy, is to look good and to feel good individually for as long as you humanly can, and to not be naturally accepting of what nature wants you to do. And that's a philosophical question, I guess. And I hear people say, well, that's not natural, as if that means it's not good. But on an individual level, nature wants nothing good for you after you've raised your kids.
Right. Well, then also we can argue that it's not natural for us to age the way that we are, as young as we are nowadays, due
Right.
to the type of processed foods that we all eat. You know, there was, I don't know if you read that paper about the Japanese kids. It was kind of cute. They asked a group of kids from Japan what their favorite foods were. And it was like steamed rice, broccoli, radishes. You know, you're not going to get that in
No,
America.
no,
Those kids don't
no.
even know what that is.
No.
Right.
Right.
So, you know, you have that argument again. Yes, it's natural, but I don't think dementia was natural. So, you know, to say type 3 diabetes, known as Alzheimer's, was not natural. Type
Right.
2 diabetes is not natural.
Right.
I have infants coming to me at 6 months old with type 2 diabetes. That's not fucking natural. Okay.
Right.
So
for sure.
So for me, you know, maybe it's not natural, but you know, there's so many variations, and you don't need to take genetics even into play. But if you take in just our lifestyles in America is not natural. Every other country has it down right except for us. And they do age differently than we do. Now, again, as you said, I'm still going to fight. You know, yes, I'm not going to, I know we're going to die. I'm okay. Hit the restart button today.
Rage against the dying of the light.
You got it. You got it. I just don't want to look like a melted candle, right? I don't want to look like that. I don't want to not know my name. Okay.
Right.
So now another group of that. So you have your testosterone, you have your estradiol, you have your HRT, your TRTs that you can get medically. You are not even going to be able to get human growth hormone, medically speaking. So there is the other variation that we have, which are peptides. Now, I've never really heard you speak a lot about peptides. What are the rules, if you will, law-wise, legally, as far as peptides go? Because I mean, you may not be able to get your hands on human growth hormone, even though I think if you can't afford it, leave it alone. But you do have things like your ipamorelin, your testosterone, you know, you can do ipamorelin, CJC. So, which are just precursors, you know, they just kind of wake your body up a little bit. Do they work? Yes. I've seen it. It can tighten your skin. It can make you feel good, get a little pep in your step. So you want to go to the gym, maybe help you make better food choices. So where do peptides fall in this whole thing?
So the way our system works in the drug world in the United States is that in order to prescribe a drug, it has to be approved by the FDA. And that doesn't mean just that the compound has to be approved. It's the particular brand has to be approved in order for that to be sold and prescribed. There are compounding pharmacies that can take drugs that are approved for human use and can make compounded versions under limited circumstances. But if a drug is approved by the FDA, it's okay to prescribe. If a drug is not approved by the FDA, then there's problems with prescribing it. So if you take a drug, a peptide like, let's say, BPC 157, which is a very popular peptide, which is prescribed or is used by folks and prescribed by some practitioners for muscle tears and injuries. And, you know, we both, I'm sure, know many people who've used BPC 157 and TB 500 in gyms across the country. They're very popular, but most of the reports are anecdotal, right? It's mostly, you know, people saying, hey, it worked, or other people saying, hey, I didn't feel that much of it. There's no real set studies on exactly how to use it. And so because these things are not actually approved by FDA, there's restrictions on the ability of any practitioner in the US to really prescribe them. I know that there are doctors who are prescribing them, but it's problematic. And if most of those practitioners look at their insurance documents, their policy for malpractice, there's usually an exclusion that says that if you prescribe unapproved drugs, you're not covered for any injuries that result from that. And so it's kind of a brave new world when it comes to a lot of these unapproved drugs that are being prescribed to folks as peptides. They may show great promise, but until they're approved, there are problems with it. Do I see a crackdown by FDA on the practitioners who are involved? I haven't seen that yet. And that may be, and again, I'm everything I've said is in the context of being a lawyer. I'm not a medical professional or a doctor. And I also add at some point in any of my podcasts that everything I say is not to be construed as legal advice or to create an attorney-client relationship just by hearing what I'm saying. But those things said, it does seem like generally the government is not going after practitioners who are involved in this, in part because I think the FDA has limited resources and they try to focus mostly on where harms, if people are dying from salmonella, that's something they're going to jump into. I have not heard a lot about people dropping dead from peptides. I don't see it happening at all. And so, and it may be that FDA, while it may be technically illegal to do, I'm not really seeing FDA cracking down on it at that level. They may be cracking down on the raw materials for compounding purposes and things like that, but not the practitioners, at least up until this point.
Okay. Yeah. And so I would imagine there's no difference then between oral BPC 157 versus injectable.
No, there's no legal distinction. The definition of a drug in the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act incorporates everything transdermals and injectables, orals. If it is a synthetic chemical that's being used to affect the structure or function of the body, then it's a drug, regardless of the route of administration.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, I think that's fun. That's actually fun. It's interesting. That's got my brain going big time.
There you go.
So in your time that you've been in the gym, doing your own stuff, and also being a lawyer, let's just talk personally. What have you seen in the change overall in the whole industry of TRT and HRT?
So when I first started, back when we rode our chariots to the gym, it was long before TRT or HRT really even existed. When the 1990 law went into effect, there really was no such thing as an anti-aging medical community. It didn't exist. And maybe had it existed then, there might have been at least some pushback in the criminalization process, because it was only looked at through the context of sport. The Ben Johnson and the NFL and people are using steroids and this is terrible and we got to get steroids out of sports. I think if there was more recognition that, hey, there are people, men, let's say, or both, who are in need of these, and there's more medical uses than are being that Congress is being advised, there might have been a little more consideration of what they did in 1990. But HRT and TRT really didn't take off until maybe the mid 90s, I guess, or even the later 90s.
Do you think that had anything to do with the outbreak of AIDS?
Yes. So I think the connection there is that the use of anabolics, of androgens, of things like oxandrolone and testosterone and nandrolone were recognized as a way to keep muscle mass on people who had Kaposi sarcoma or had AIDS-related wasting disorders. So even growth hormone and anabolic steroids were part of the cocktail that saved lives in the AIDS epidemic. There's no question about it. Did that, at least begin the process of, destigmatizing to some degree these things in a medical context? I think so. These things that Congress was told will just kill you. These are terrible. Well, wait a minute. If you've got an immune disorder and you're dying, these things will actually save you. Became something that I don't think Congress had ever even imagined. If you remember back in the day, Lyle Alzado, who was an NFL player who died of a particular type of brain cancer, blamed his cancer on steroids and growth hormone.
Mm.
And it was a T cell lymphoma of the brain. And so that was in like 1991. So in the early 90s, it was just this continued, oh, this stuff is terrible, this will kill
Sure.
you. And then along came the AIDS epidemic and this other message that, wait a minute, this stuff will save you.
Well, I mean, that's even an argument with creatine. Okay, something as simple as creatine. And, just like anything else, you have the quality. I know when oh God, let's see, how long ago was that? Years ago. We'll just say that, about 20 years ago. I took a creatine from a company. It was one of those before everything was online and you went into stores, remember supplement stores, those fun things?
Vaguely,
Yeah.
yes. Yeah.
Yes, vaguely. And this was a bodybuilding performance store. And I'm tiny, I was tiny, I'm tiny. And so I was like, all right, what can I do? I want to not be so skinny, and eating didn't do it because I don't put on weight, whatever. Okay. So
a lot of people would be very jealous of that.
I know, trust me. So I'm just glad I'm a girl, because if I was a man, I'd have small man syndrome for sure. And I took this creatine, and I remember it made me not feel so good. I remember calling him and being like, what is up with this creatine? And then, oh, nothing later on. And I won't give the name of the company, but later on came out that they were having DHT in the creatine.
Oh, wow.
So, it's like, people are so directed, if you will, herded, I call it herding cattle, into looking at things like testosterone and looking at these big named specific anabolic steroids, but they don't necessarily pay attention to the supplements that they're taking from companies that maybe they're not even third-party tested. Sure. And so I think that people should stop, as looking through a straw and look at everything and anything if that's what they're going to pay attention to. But creatine is not bad, and it's not for muscle building as much as we thought it was.
Right.
It's very beneficial for the brain.
Sure.
Charles taught me that forever ago. If you're over 40, you need 10 milligrams every.
Right.
Yeah.
But
every
as you age,
grams.
Sure. Yes.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, it's been one of my staples, and I put a lot of my clients on it, especially anybody that's over 40, 50, 60 years old, they're on it. And it's crazy to see the difference when you get a good product. So what are, we've talked about the big stuff, the medical stuff, the stuff that's hard to get your hands on, but what is it? What are the rules with supplement companies in general? Are there any?
So, yes, the mainstream media will typically say that supplements, the dietary supplement market is unregulated. There are no regulations. It's a wild west, and that's not true. There's tons of regulations. The FDA regulates it. The FTC regulates the claims that are made. States attorneys general are involved. Even individual states get involved in the regulation. So, dietary supplements need now to be made under good manufacturing rules. There are things called adverse event reporting requirements, which means that, hey, I took a bottle of creatine and I don't feel good. I call the phone number on the back of that bottle and I make that report, and they have to document that call, document that report. And if it's a serious adverse event, hey, I took a bottle of this fat burner and, I'm in the hospital, I had a cardiac issue, they've got to report that to the FDA. So there's all sorts of ways that the supplement industry is regulated. We just had a law passed where I am based in New York, where the New York legislature has said that you cannot sell creatine or any muscle building or weight loss dietary supplement to anybody under the age of 18. And that if anybody looks under 25, you've got to card them. So, and that's under the theory that these products cause eating disorders, which doesn't make a lot of sense. I don't think, certainly we have problems with eating disorders, but I don't think that these products cause them. And creatine, I think, is a safe and healthy ingredient, as you just said, for, I would think even 17-year-olds would get benefit out of creatine. So the fact that they can, they're forbidden under state law in New York, and other states are looking at kind of following through in their jurisdictions, it's just a lot of misinformation out there.
That blows my mind. You can literally poison somebody with food, but
Right.
they're making more and more supplements that have been
Right.
proven year after year
Right.
to be beneficial.
Yeah.
They're
I mean,
banning
I think, if anything, we want to encourage people at a young age to go to the gym
Mhm.
and to, get into better shape. We have an epidemic of childhood obesity.
Yes, we do.
There's a major problem there. And I think that eating disorders are separate and apart and should be dealt with in a different way.
Absolutely. And I think we have an eating disorder in a different way that we are not looking at because you're not allowed to look at, right? I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Type 2 diabetes is a choice. It's an eating disorder. Let's be
Yeah.
real. Okay. So to end this, let's say this. What is the number one thing that people need to know in your realm?
Well, if you're in the realm of my dietary supplement clients, if you're in the dietary supplement industry, sports nutrition industry, you got to make sure that you abide by all of these laws, because it is a highly regulated industry. It's not like selling shoes or shirts. It's highly regulated, and you want to speak to a lawyer who knows and understands that. They can certainly reach out to me if they want to. rickcollins.com is an easy way to find me. You and I are connected on social media. Rick Collins ESQ is an easy way to find me on Instagram. And if you're in that sort of, not so clean, darker world of the black market anabolic steroids, either from the perspective of a user or a distributor or a trafficker or an importer, whatever it is, I always say, know your rights. Right. So you've got certain rights that we all do under the Constitution. And so I think as the criminal defense lawyer in me always says, there's a 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendment protection that you have. The 4th Amendment says you don't have to consent to a search. If they have a search warrant, then they can search. But otherwise, you can say, I prefer not to. So you don't have to consent to a warrantless search. Second, the 5th Amendment means that you don't have to give incriminating information about yourself. You don't have to answer questions about your steroid use or what you're doing in those regards. You can simply say, I prefer not to answer those questions. In some countries, there's a negative inference if you don't answer questions by the police. That doesn't happen here. And then the last thing is the 6th Amendment, and that says everybody has the right to an attorney. And I've had many, many clients who have been approached by law enforcement who either come to their house or to their work because they suspect that they're involved in something wrong. It might be that they're involved in selling selective androgen receptor modulators or peptides illegally or research chemicals under shady circumstances. And they don't have to consent to the search. They don't have to answer questions. And the simple answer that they give, the smartest thing that they've done, is to simply say, you know what, give me your card and my lawyer will get in touch with you. He will deal with all of these things. He's the smartest guy in the world, Rick Collins. You may have heard of him. And they've actually done that. And so instead of having, some incriminating information or lies, because you never want to lie to a federal agent who's investigating a crime, because that lie alone is a federal crime. That's what Martha Stewart went to prison for, right? Not stock trading, but simply lying about a stock trade. So protecting your rights, not answering questions, and just saying, listen, let my lawyer handle this. Give me your information. Always be respectful. Always be polite. And that's the way that you maximize your protection. And then, feel free to reach out to me. I get calls from people all over the country and the world. I've represented people in other countries with various legal issues. And so I love what I do. Adrian, I'm so blessed. I've been able to to meld my vocation and my avocation, the things I'm passionate about, the things I enjoy. You know, I'm at the gym 5 days a week. I've got my own little training posse. Some of them date back with me for 25 years. So I love that world that I'm in. And I've been able to kind of use everything that I've learned and put that together with my experiences as a trial lawyer and an advocate, and to create this kind of unicorn-like career that allows me to help people in ways that, you know, they really truly need.
Yes, and I appreciate that, because I too have been lucky enough to piece all my stuff together, and I love what I do as well. So, you know, it's nice when we get to play in our field of making money at the same time.
Yep.
You know, it's a gift, I would say.
It certainly
Well, Rick,
is.
this has been awesome. I thank you so much for your time, and I'm sure there's going to be more
Thank
coming
you.
with the growth of more people stepping up and wanting to use these products, wanting to be healthier longer, wanting to not, you know, to prevent aging and disease. Let's just say diseasing, and then also with the expansion of peptides. I think
Sure.
that this is going to just, I think you're just going to keep getting bigger. You better hire more help, buddy.
Will do. From your lips to God's ears. Thank you. It's always fun talking with you. You know, we could talk about SARMS. We could talk about so many other things at some point in the future, or the enhanced games or any of that stuff. But yeah, this was a lot of fun, and I'll look forward to maybe doing it again someday.
Absolutely. I will get you back on here soon.